The JFK 35 podcast is made possible through generous support from the Blanche and Irving Laurie Foundation.
JFK 35 is a production of the JFK Library Foundation. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed are the guest's own and do not represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of others at the JFK Library Foundation or the JFK Library, including staff, board, or donors. The material and information presented here is for general historical and educational information purposes only. The views expressed in the podcast are not meant to imply any endorsement of or opposition to any organization or political party.
The objects, they function as witnesses to that history.
From a young woman's drawing of John F. Kennedy with a mustache to boxes of dog treats found in his Oval Office desk on the day he died, the John F. Kennedy Presidential Library Museum holds tens of thousands of letters, photographs, films, and artifacts that continue to bear witness to history.
We talk with the library's supervisory archivist and museum curator about some of their favorite items from the collections. That's next on JFK 35.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.
Hello, I'm Matt Porter.
And I'm Jamie Richardson. Welcome to the continuation of our 15th season of JFK 35. Our show took an unexpected break this fall, but we're back to close out the season with staff picks from the John F. Kennedy Presidential Library and Museum.
The library's archival and museum collections include more than 25 million documents and over 35,000 artifacts. Many relate directly to the policies and events of the John F. Kennedy administration. Others are more unexpected mementos, everyday objects that still carry remarkable stories.
Some of these items were sent by members of the public to the White House. Others are ordinary objects preserved because of their connection to President Kennedy's life there. In this episode, we're joined by Supervisory Archivist Abbey Malangone and Museum Curator Janice Hodson to share a few of these items and the stories they tell us about life during the Kennedy administration. Abbey and Janice, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
So before we get into the items that you've selected for us today, and we're really excited to talk about them, why don't you start by just briefly letting the audience know what are your roles here? What do you do for the JFK Library?
I'm the Supervisory Museum Curator. So I oversee the management of the object collections here, exhibits, preservation, just all things objects.
All right. And Abbey.
And I am Janice's counterpart on the archive side, so I'm the supervisory archivist, and I oversee and direct the archives department of the library, which includes all of our textual or paper holdings, as well as our audiovisual materials, so photographs and film and video.
Great. Do you want to take the second half of that?
Sure. And one thing I'm very excited to talk to both of you about is that you often get to see things a lot of people don't see, and you might be sometimes the first person to see something as you're sort of processing or cleaning something up. So we're just very excited to see what kind of fun finds you have for us.
We're really happy to start to talk about the letters that JFK has received. And Abbey, one of the first letters you submitted to us was this letter from well-known author John Steinbeck. Steinbeck attended the inauguration for JFK and then wrote a really nice letter, which for me, living in the time we're in now, it feels like the lost art of letter writing. So it's really interesting to go back when people wrote letters. Why don't you tell us a little bit about this letter from John Steinbeck and a little bit about the response he got from President Kennedy?
Yeah, sure. So, as you said, letter from John Steinbeck to President Kennedy thanking him for the inauguration. I actually stole this letter as a favorite of one of my colleagues. Steinbeck is one of her favorite authors, so she found this in one of our constituent mail collections where we find a lot of great materials that researchers really helps them out as well. It was a little bit unusual at the time for a president to invite artists or writers to the inauguration. This was an effort kind of spearheaded by a journalist and author, Kay Halley, and JFK was very on board with having these individuals represented at the inauguration. I love Steinbeck's letter and thanks, and I will quote part of it where he says, a nation may be moved by its statesmen and defended by its military, but it is usually remembered for its artists. And so it's just such a great sentiment. And you could tell he was very touched by the invitation and having been there and witnessed it. And I think President Kennedy was equally gratified to have these individuals represented at his inauguration. He did mention the arts in his inaugural address. Kay Hallie actually put together a scrapbook of some letters and other thanks that these individuals sent after the inauguration. And from her oral history account, she said that the president was very excited to read all of these letters.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see President Kennedy's focus on the arts, something that I feel like we take a little for granted. A lot of presidents will highlight the arts now, but as you said, this wasn't something that was, regularly done. This was a new thing?
Yes. It'd be kind of, I can't say never. I don't have all the facts on that. But even in the responses, you could tell from other individuals like this. So it wasn't just writers and artists, but important scientific figures as well were also invited. So this was kind of a new territory for the political arena to include these types of artists.
Not to get bogged down in process, but I'm curious about it. It's a typed letter back to Steinbeck. What's kind of the process for JFK's staff when they receive letters? Because obviously he can't respond to each one personally, and whether how much, feedback JFK gave into the response, or whether, how were these type of letters handled? And depending on who sent the letter, did it receive different types of priorities?
Yeah, so from our understanding, there was kind of a central mail room that broke all of these out. Their preference was for subject coding everything. So this particular letter is in a subject about the president, and then there's usually executive in general. So, the executives are a little more important, fancy people, and those tended to get routed to not strictly straight to the president himself, but other members of his team who would then bring it to the president or his secretary or another staff member for a response.
And, as we get into the letters, how many people are writing to the president on a regular basis, like when we're talking about?
There is a lot. We have a lot of constituent mail collections. We have the White House Central Subject Files, which is where this particular Steinbeck letter came out of. We have a name file. We have public opinion mail. We have congratulations, get well messages. So by our estimates, we have about over 1,500 cubic feet of this material, which translate to about 2.8 million pages.
Wow.
Yeah. There's a lot.
It's
a gold mine of information, really.
It's a lot when you're measuring mail in cubic feet.
Yeah, we did find I found several years ago a letter that kind of stemmed from the mailroom, and at that time they averaged 33 inches of mail was about 1,000 letters. And at that time in 1961, it seems that they sampled every 50th letter or so to share. And I don't know if that was maintained throughout. That was kind of just a passing.
So just when you say sampled, can you?
I think they must have pulled it out to actually show it to the president. That was my interpretation of it. But I haven't found anything since then that kind of goes over that more. That was 61, so maybe that was the intention at the beginning. I don't know if that was maintained throughout. I like to think so.
And then another one, this actually isn't to President Kennedy, but it is to one of his close advisors, Ted Sorensen, and it's actually not even a letter to him. It's a little handwritten note that it seems like he may have written after receiving a letter. And can you please read that for us?
I would love to. This is a letter that I found while processing an accretion to the Ted Sorensen personal papers collection that we have here. He received a lot of correspondence well after his time in the Kennedy administration from people who were curious or students writing papers or people writing books and wanting to speak with him. And he was always very generous with his time. He always answered people, but this one struck me as particularly funny. It seems the author had sent him a question about the Cuban Missile Crisis, and his he responded a little bit, but in handwriting caption on the side, he wrote, "Please read my book, Kennedy, chapter 24 for all the answers. In history, that's known as research. Good luck, Ted Sorensen." And as someone who has done a lot of reference work in the past, sometimes you want to tell people this, where, hey, the information's there. You just have to find it. You don't need to ask me directly for it. So it also showed he had a great sense of humor as well. So it was just kind of a fun find, but a cautionary tale because I did not write down the date, the sender, what folder it was in, what box it was in, and now I can't find it anymore. So I know it's in there somewhere, and I hope to uncover it one day, but this is just a note to always cite where you get your information from, because it'll help you in the long run, and I did not heed my own advice.
And I imagine, well, how big is the Ted Sorensen collection if you're...
I don't remember exact numbers. I think we're upwards of, it's over 100 cubic feet. It basically captures his whole life. So it's going to take a little while to find, and his correspondence series are quite voluminous.
Mm-hmm. But that's a nice needle in the haystack. Once you find
one day I'm going to find
again,
it, we'll come back. We'll do a celebratory podcast.
We'll have you back on for that.
Yes.
Did Sorensen ever teach? Did he ever teach towards the end of his life?
Not that I'm aware of.
That snarky note just
Yeah.
feels like a college professor.
He was a very smart guy, so I'm sure he could have.
I'm sure he's answered a lot of questions of like,
yes,
you went on with the Cuban Missile Crisis. Okay, that's not like a one sentence answer.
Exactly. And yeah, he's like, I wrote this book so I could tell you all about it. So just
I
look
already
back.
did it.
Look at it.
Exactly.
And I'm going to have a little subsection of this episode, which I'm calling now Unusual Portraits of JFK. And both Abbey and Janice have brought in, not physically here with us, but we'll see them online for the listeners. These unusual, atypical portraits of JFK. There's lots of amazing portraits of him at the White House, National Gallery of Art, here in the building. But I hadn't seen one of them before, and I'm really excited that I have now. So Abbey, this comes from a letter from a high school student, and letters from kids are usually my favorite. They're very direct. They're very honest. So can you read at least some of if not you want to do all of it, but just maybe the first paragraph or so of this letter?
Yeah, absolutely. So this comes from our White House social file, which essentially was mail that went to Mrs. Kennedy and the White House social office. So Judy Abbott writes, "Dear Mrs. Kennedy, I am a very insignificant high school girl whose opinion is of no value, but I thought you might find it interesting to see your husband with a mustache and sideburns. I don't mean this as sacrilege. I just think he looks very good, sort of happy, distinguished, and Western movie banker-ish.
Before we get to the photo, I just have to comment on the self-awareness of the person writing. But come on, you have value. But that was such an interesting note. I know people write to you who are presidents and popes, but I want to write this note.
I know. It's like, Judy, believe in yourself. Also, her sign-off is sincerely yours, parentheses, no offense. She doesn't want anyone to be offended. It was just a hobby of hers that she liked to do.
And so can you please describe the visual, be all that and more, but please describe what she sent along to the First Lady.
I'd be delighted. So this was kind of to your point. We have so many things in our collection, material, letters. We have 24 million pages in our collection. So we aren't going to see everything. So we're discovering things all of the time. And this was a recent find for me. But Judy herself tells us this was a photograph that was on the cover of the Saturday Evening Post. So she has just drawn some sideburns on the president, a nice little mustache that comes up at the end, a little twirly,
a little Dali-esque.
Yeah, a little waxed-esque mustache. But it looks good.
It does. It's got the right color ink or pen.
Yeah, and somehow she gets the texture in there. So she's a real talent. I've tried to find her. I can't, because I would love to talk to her and see a whole exhibit of her drawing mustaches on things. But real talent here, real good. Just nice. It's just a fun find. Sometimes it's just nice to see something light and fun.
You're seeing things before they're released or made sort of available to the public to research. So there's some very heavy things that come just as president here specifically. So just having a nice photo of JFK with a mustache and sideburns is delightful.
Just a little something out of the ordinary.
It reminds me of when first AI tools came out for pictures, people started asking computers to show me someone with a mustache or show me what they look like 100 years from now. And like, you can just see that urge to do that existed well beyond the technology that we have today.
It's a universal shared experience, I guess. Yes.
He looks better with the mustache than he does as a sad clown. The painting we have in the collection.
And we will put that on the show.
Yes, we'll make sure. I'm making a note right now.
Maybe we could do a side by side and people can vote.
Yeah.
We can see.
An extra artifact for everybody right there.
Bonus. And then Janice, over to your unusual portrait of JFK. This is a physical object. I think it's on the smaller side of things, but can you please let us know what you brought it talking about?
It's a foot-tall carved sculpture of Kennedy as Mr. America that was made by an admirer in Michigan. The base that he's standing on, he's in a muscle man pose with his arms upraised and, showing the muscles. And the base says, "Pull in that gut, America." In this situation, we have the corresponding letter that was sent with the sculpture, Letters in Archives. And the maker said that he was inspired by a public service ad that was in Esquire magazine, promoting the president's physical fitness program, which really had a Cold War slant to it because the public service ad plays up, humorously, but it plays up the need for strong youth to fight against communism and things like, a bulging bicep means a muscle in the arm of democracy. So we all need big bulging biceps right now.
Even JFK.
If there was any evidence that forms of masculinity that people talk about today existed back then,
Yep.
this is a good example.
Yeah, and what's the other one? A weak bicep is no match for a red fist or something like that. It's in there.
Just protein and strength training.
Trying to reframe the public's attitude towards exercise. So that was his inspiration. He was actually working on it in 1963. The artist from Michigan, amateur carver, and then Kennedy was assassinated, and he went ahead and finished it at the encouragement of his family and friends, sent it to Jacqueline Kennedy with a letter saying that he concludes it by saying that he figures that Kennedy, with his sense of humor, wouldn't have been offended by this portrayal. The public service ad it was modeled on is much more exaggerated because they basically took a photo of a Mr. America and stuck Kennedy's head on it. So it's more exaggerated than the sculpture. But, the sculpture it's just a cool thing. And Kennedy probably would have appreciated it, I think. And it's also interesting as an example of how, this portrayal of him is an example of how the public saw him as, man of vigor. He was presenting that public persona when, we know that he had serious health issues. But it's just not something the public saw him as, they saw him very differently than the private reality.
And do either of you know, these actually were sent to Mrs. Kennedy, which is interesting. Any sense of what her reaction was, or if it was just only her staff saw it and they were like, we don't need to bring this to her, or she needs a laugh today, so maybe.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I haven't checked to see if the archives has any response, even from, Mrs. Kennedy's secretary just saying, "Oh, thank you for this interesting portrait," or something. But it may be in there, but we haven't sought it out at this point.
Research projects for
Credit though to whoever made sure that it made it into the archives so that we could have this conversation.
Yes. definitely.
Moving from a little less comical and kind of fun to the Cuban Missile Crisis, a drastic turn here. But, we all know, 13 days, and we know how close the world came to a nuclear war, and thankfully that did not happen. And after that, President Kennedy, Janice, you can tell me whether he commissioned, someone created this calendar that has the 13 days on it and has the initials JBK and JFK at the top. Why don't you tell us a little bit about how this calendar came to be, this little paperweight calendar, just to know it's not like a big paper calendar, it's a paperweight. How it came to be, and who got these mementos?
Yeah, it's the design is basically a wooden rectangle with a silver calendar that says October 1962, has all the days of the month on it, with the 13 days of the Cuban Missile Crisis bold and in bold. And up at the top on the left-hand side, it says the initials JFK. On the right-hand side, JBK. Kennedy had 34 of these made to give to those who were working with him most closely during the Cuban Missile Crisis, or who were supporting him, during the Cuban Missile Crisis. So this is the one he had them commissioned. He had them made by Tiffany's. This particular example was the one he gave to his wife. We have one other one in the collection, and that it happens to be the one that he presented to Ted Sorensen. He also had one made, one of these 34 he had made for himself. No one knows where that one is.
Oh.
And he had one made for his brother, Attorney General Robert Kennedy. So it's interesting that we don't have a lot of material culture from the Kennedy White House that applies to the Cuban Missile Crisis. It's more, it's documented in the archives fully, but it's an example of Kennedy wanting to somehow memorialize, that event.
And so the one we have, the one we're looking at, and people can see on our website when we post it, is the one given to Mrs. Kennedy. So then I assume that the initials JBK were not on each one. They were a change for each person?
Yes, they were.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
And I want to get into the initials here, because personally this is a very close to heart thing, being the public-facing representative that gets emails and comments directly to me on things that we do, and talk about internet comments and things like that. But there was one person who wrote who saw the paperweights after they were made, and apparently was a very deep font calligraphy expert, went very much into detail, that basically the way the J was made and the way the font works is actually an I.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Yeah.
And
somebody
what
actually, it's in the archive, someone wrote to say, oh, there's a mistake. Somebody wrote, saw it years later, and it's in our catalog folder for this object, saying that he had been an engraver, and he said that the font that was used, what's represented as a J in that calendar, is actually an I, and he's completely right. But an action, let me see if I'm remembering this correctly. I think something was actually sent to the White House, because there was a reproduction or an image of these calendars that came out in a paper, because he was noting that this mistake was made, but nobody bothered to. Nobody cared. Yeah. Nobody bothered to change
no one looked
them.
that closely.
And I looked at the Sorensen one after seeing that to see, did maybe they started using the right capital letter for J, and no, it's the same way with the Ted Sorensen.
Is it once you see
engraving.
it, you can't unsee it?
Yeah.
Yeah, the engraver, we have the letter and we'll put it on our site, as J. Lichtenbaum. Not sure where he's from. It just says engraver. But, maybe this is a moment to also bring Abbey in again. This wasn't the first time JFK would receive mail that would critique something they've done or make a note.
Yes. People are always happy to share their knowledge of things. I can't think of any specific examples right now, unfortunately. But there's just always, hey, why are you doing this? Why aren't you doing this type of thing? And usually the White House responded, maybe not from the president himself, but always thanking them for their input and their interest in what is going on in the world at this time. So,
okay. So to move from the world of the Cuban Missile Crisis and, sort of the 1960s version of internet folks emailing you with critiques, the other interesting item you chose, Janice, and it's on display in our special presidential pets exhibit, are these boxes of foodles, treats for dogs. Tell us about them, and why did the JFK Library preserve these items?
Foodles, gains, Foodles, gains, and what's the other one? Trainers. They were the three treat boxes. There were actually some we have 2 examples of. But those were among the items cleaned out of the Resolute desk after Kennedy's death. And it's surprising to me that in 1963-64 that something like that didn't just get tossed out. It's what I would have expected at that time. I'm very thankful that they weren't, that they were saved, because the Kennedys were not people who really saved anything related to their pets. And this is a type of item that we can all relate to. And I think of it as on the museum side with the object collection as the equivalent of the preservation of things in an archival collection, in a person's personal papers, of invoices, receipts, things that at one time were just not considered important as part of the documentation of a person's life. And now we know that those things are very important in understanding and researching people's activities. The dog treat boxes are just an example of the personal items that survive, and it's probably the most mundane of the personal items that survive, but that's why I feel they're important.
I think thinking about, if you walk down in the museum, the White House corridor has state gifts of, jewels and fine metals and fabrics and, artistry.
Gifts from the Pope.
Yeah.
Right. And then this little food box with a little plastic window on it, and who knows what those little treats smelled like, and when he gave them to the dogs.
And, some are supposed to be chocolate flavored.
Yeah.
That seems safe.
Yeah.
And to me, that's another, it doesn't just show the humanity of President Kennedy, but it is a snapshot of culture, right? Like how, even if you're like a marketing person, you can look at how, graphic design was in the 1960s just by looking at this Foodles box that was preserved, right? Get a sense of what the culture of the time felt like, and the fact that chocolate wasn't a no-no in the 1960s.
Well, on the archive side, in AV archives, we have photos of Kennedy in the White House. We can tell, oh yeah, that's a trainer's box. Oh yeah, he's got the Foodles in this one. Photos of him giving them to one of the 5 dogs that they had during the White House years. There's a photo of his personal secretary, Evelyn Lincoln, feeding one of the dogs treats at Hyannisport. So it's those times when we, the 2 sides of the collection, combine together to give a fuller picture of the item, how it was used, to help personalize it.
And lastly, you already kind of touched on our next question, which was going to be, why is it important for libraries to preserve these items? So I'm just going to skip ahead to our last question, which is, what do you hope future generations will take away from the preservation of items like the ones we've been talking about?
That's a good question. I think we just want to keep things available because we never know how they're going to be used. right, it could be something where it's an object, but then years from now, it's a study about fonts, and we would never have thought an object like that was going to be used in that way. Maybe we have letters about a particular topic or things about the military, but it's really going to be mined for other information. We never know how research trends are going to go or what interest people are going to have, so making sure we have all of this available in whatever use it might be used for. And that's what we do. We are here for the public to look at these materials. So we just want to make sure they're available for a long time.
Yeah, the goal is to preserve the items, and it's a delicate balance with materials on exhibit in particular, of providing that public access. Otherwise, why do you have it? But also making sure that the object is preserved for future generations to also access, to, in our case, create a portrait of Kennedy, as full a portrait as possible, a portrait of his times that people can learn from. And the objects, they function as witnesses to that history that survive. We'll be gone, but the objects that these people, these historical figures interacted with will still be here to tell, their different stories. You look at the story that the coconut fragment tells, about Kennedy, and it provides that story and an understanding of that story with a deeper level by having that object survive.
And if I may, I might just add as well, it's, even though we are more or less about President Kennedy and his life and his times, archives like this are also a great way for people to find themselves in them and to become more involved in that time. We had an example recently where Janice and I worked together, and between the two of us, we were able to provide information to someone about their grandmother or about a person themselves who wrote when they were a kid, or that their mom wrote or a family friend wrote. So it's a way to kind of connect people to the past as well, and for them to have proof of their existence and their importance and their place in history as well. I think that's a really important aspect too.
And also just seeing, knowing that President Kennedy kept dog treats in his desk. Like, I know I've put in my hand a number of coats and pants and robes and just found dog treats and poop bags in them. So it's like, well,
presidents are
a little
just
more
like us.
relatable.
And the last thing I'll say is it's true. The Archivist, more than a few years ago now, when I was here and I mentioned that my mother wrote the president, and they found her note. And speaking of insignificant notes, it was just like, hi, I'm writing this for a school project. I don't like my brother's name very much. But, when you showed my mom the actual physical letter that she had written, 60 years ago, she's got now the copy, and she framed it. You guys gave her a copy of it, and she framed it. And so these can be really important to people. And so it's great that you guys are doing all this hard work, keeping it preserved. And thank you for joining us today to share some of your items.
Thanks for letting us
Thank you.
participate.
Thank you for listening to our most recent episode in our special Staff Pick series. If you're interested in learning more about some of the items we discussed today, you can visit our podcast page for this episode. It includes links to scanned documents or photographs of all the items mentioned today.
If you have questions or story ideas, email us at jfk35pod@jfklfoundation.org, or tag us at JFK Library FDN, or use the hashtag JFK35. If you liked what you heard today, please consider subscribing to our podcast or leaving us a review wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening, and have a great week.